Sometimes you just get that feeling, you know, that you want to set up a server. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, today we're going to be setting up a server. We're going to cover the very basics of setting up a server. This will be a VPS with the cloud hosting provider Linode. They have a better UI than AWS. They have, to my knowledge, a lot less to answer for than Amazon as a company. Whatever you see here will probably translate quite well to other VPS providers if you want to use something else. Virtual private servers and instances work very similarly across providers. To use Linode, you need an account. You can usually pull a promo code for a decent chunk of credit from podcasts like Changelog or ATP or tons of others. They sponsor a ton of shows, and that will let you try a server for free, which can be neat. So this is the sign up page. I'm not going to go through the sign up flow. You'll have to figure it out. All right, so let's get to it. Let's get into our dashboard. So this is where you land when you log into Linode. We land straight in the Linodes, and that's what they call their VPSs. Everyone has a cutesy word. It's a droplet, or it's a Linode, or it's an instance of some sort, an EC2. So if we just hit create Linode, that takes us to the page for creating a Linode. And in this process, we are asked to choose a Linux distribution to run. So let's go find Ubuntu. And here we can consider whether we want to grab the latest one or grab the latest long-term support, which means you won't have to update as often. We can go with the latest one. I often use Debian as well, but in this case, let's go with Ubuntu. It also is the one with the most support documentation all over the web, I think. So it's a pretty good choice. Then you have to select a region. So this is where your virtual server will be located. So where the actual hardware is. I usually go with Frankfurt, Deutschland, because it's close to me. So for speed, you might want to choose something that is close to where your users would be. But in this case, don't overthink it. Just choose something that'll work. And any of them should work. It's just a matter of latency, how long it takes to communicate with. Then you need to choose your Linode plan, which is essentially about how beefy and capable you want your server to be. And that directly affects cost. So for hobbyists and learning, I'd go with something in the shared CPU category, like these. These will not perform as well as the dedicated CPUs typically. You'll be sharing your processor with other customers. I think it's fine for learning. I'll grab Linode 4 gigabytes, which is 2 shared CPUs, 4 gigabyte of RAM, 80 gigabytes of storage for $20 a month. Let's dub it How Do Server. And in this case, I don't have a lot of servers, so I don't need any tags. Then we need a root password. So let's go with this is a great root password. Don't use this. That's a terrible root password. Use your password manager, generate a long one, save it. And saving it is important as there are no guarantees that you can get it back or reset it. So don't lose it unless you want to start over. We can also add SSH keys, so I've already added some SSH keys on Linode, and then they would pre-install them. But let's skip that for now. No VLAN, no add-ons. All right, then we hit this button, create Linode. Now you can see that it's provisioning. That means they are taking the Linux image you selected. They're finding a server with the requested hardware available, and they are starting your VPS instance on that and setting up the networking and everything. You can see that we have IP addresses. The one with the dots here, that's IPv4. And this is IP version 6 with the colons. Oh, now it's booting, and now it's running. Once we waited for the status to go to running, then the server is up. They help you out with some access commands here. So this is SSH access, which we will use. It should work in macOS and Linux, and if you're using PuTTY or similar in Windows, you should be able to grab the IP address and put that in the host field. PuTTY will prompt you for your username and password. So we can grab this and switch to the terminal. We want to connect as root to this IP address. You have to say yes to the fingerprint. Oh. Now, that particular SSH command won't work quite right for me. I will get too many authentication failures. So what I need to do is use this. I need to force SSH to actually prompt me for the password, otherwise it will try all of my public key files and then decide that there's nothing that works and just abandon it. But with this, I get to check the authenticity of the server, typically just yes, and then I get to type, "This is a great root password." And here we have it. Now we have shell access to our server. Shell meaning essentially command line, and really that's probably all the access you're going to need for managing it. Now, if you open this IP address in the browser, in a web browser, let's try that, we can see that the site can't be reached. It doesn't resolve, and that's because, well, this is a server, but it's not a web server yet. Let's start by making sure our server is up to date, and then we can start installing some stuff. So, since we are root, we're already admin, and we don't have to use sudo. So if you're looking at commands and they say sudo and you're root, you won't be needing them. You won't be needing the sudo part for those commands. This also means that we can do a lot of damage if we're careless. And if you do break something important, that is, don't worry, there's nothing important on this server yet. And you can always just remove it and create a new one to start over. Or you can see if you want to try to fix it. So there's a command we can do to pull information about updates to packages. So apt-get is the original toolset for Debian's package manager, which Ubuntu also uses, apt. So apt-get update pulls a bunch of updates. There are also a set of newer commands that I'm not using because I'm old. Then we can use apt-get upgrade to upgrade everything to the latest version. So this says, oh, we'll update a bunch of Linux headers and a ton of other stuff. We can say yes. If there are some things that might affect your configuration, it should prompt you. So we might need to answer a question or two, we'll see. On a system in active use, this process should probably be tested. Things can break when updated after all, but it also doesn't typically cause breakages as frequently as, say, updating NPM packages or similar, at least not in my experience. It might be fine, it might cause trouble. For production systems, I'd suggest trying it on sort of staging environments and seeing if there's problems, that kind of thing. When starting out, I would typically update and upgrade to make sure that I'm starting from the newest. And this is a prompt about our SSHD config. It says ours has been locally modified, and this might be that Linode, when they start your server, sets it up with a specific SSHD config rather than what Ubuntu ships with. So we will keep the local version currently installed, because I don't think it's going to break compatibility across SSHD versions. Oh. Which services should be restored? Good question. I don't know. Let's go with OK. Now, with all of this done, we can look for a package that can get us out on the web. Let's install Nginx. So we can search for package using apt-cache search Nginx. And here we can see a ton of different stuff, but what we want is probably this. We could just do Nginx itself up here. Let's do full. I want everything. apt-get install Nginx full. That's a bunch of packages that's being brought in. Say yes, it'll pull it in. Which services should be restarted? Seems fine. And that might just have gotten us a web server. Let's check. Ta-da! Welcome to Nginx. If you see this page, the Nginx web server is successfully installed and working. Further configuration is required. So Nginx is a good web server. If we want to edit the site that we're serving, we can find the configuration in etc. Nginx sites enabled. There's a file called default there. So if we just cat that, you can see here, this is a default setup configuration. Listening to port 80, which is the port of the web. And it says it's pulling its HTML from /var/www/html. So we can essentially change anything in there if we want to put a site in there. We can see that it's running the index.nginx debian.html right now, which means that if we put an index.html there, we can see here, it would prefer it. So we can actually do that. Hello. See how that works. Yep. Website, web server, ta-da! So you can do a lot with just that, and if you want to change the configuration and then restart, you can do service Nginx restart, and that should restart the service. Nothing much happens because we haven't changed anything. Now, if you just want to learn and experiment and don't really plan on putting production work on the server, you can keep playing around as root. If you want to learn how to secure the server, there are a number of steps that are good practices that I would suggest looking at initially. I'll put links in the description for all of these. So, number one, setting up your firewall. So I typically do straight IP tables, following the Ubuntu documentation for that. Following this guide, you can get set up so that any new port that you want to expose has to be opened explicitly, and that's pretty good because that means you don't accidentally expose ports that you didn't intend to when you're installing new software. It's also slightly inconvenient, which is how it protects you, but yeah, like most security measures, it introduces a degree of inconvenience. Now, Linode also offers documentation for doing a ton of things with servers, and one of them covers UFW, which I've heard is a more approachable firewall configurator than IP tables. So I'll link that as well. You can try that. I haven't tried it. Now, it's worth being careful if you install Docker when it comes to your firewall, because Docker will typically ignore your firewall rules in certain ways, and you must take some extra care to make sure you actually protect any Docker container ports that you do want to protect. Then, after you have a firewall that you're happy with, adding a non-root user for deployment and for everyday usage is a good idea. So you can give the user sudo access so it can run commands as root when it needs to, but it gives you a bit of a double check before you do something potentially harmful, and it prevents certain types of exploits from escalating from regular user to root user. And I'll link a piece by DigitalOcean on how to do that. And after that's done, and you've checked that it works, you can actually disable a root login via SSH. Otherwise, over time, some bots may be trying to log in with random passwords, and root is a well-known name, so it's easy to guess that part. You likely also want to set up SSH key login and then disable password login entirely. This means that your user password is only used for accessing sudo, and you need the SSH key to actually log into the server. So this essentially shuts the door on guessing your password as a way of getting into your server. And this is sort of where we get to this what is a server thing, because now everything just starts branching out. All the paths just go infinity in all directions, because there's always more you can do, both for security, but also just for what you want to do with your server. But these security measures should prevent you from being automatically eaten by bots, and it should mitigate the risks of installing new applications. So firewall, sudo, fix your SSH login so it can't be guessed. Then you probably want to point a domain to this server, if you have one. You can use the IP address. There's nothing wrong with using an IP address, but you would want to set up an A record for the IPv4 address and an AAAA record for the IPv6 one. It's probably best to set up both. I'll link a good piece by Julia Evans on what happens when you set up new DNS records and whether you'll experience a delay or not. And I thought that was a very good one. And maybe you want to install further tools like ASDF and get Erlang and Elixir going. Maybe you want to install Postgres. Maybe you want to get Docker and start bringing down some Docker images, or maybe bring in Docker Compose and Docker so you can get going from a Docker Compose file. Or maybe you install Podman instead of Docker because that seems neat. Or if you need to, you can bring in the entire LAMP stack. So you can do Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, all of it. Well, you already have Linux, so I guess it's the AMP stack you put on top of this L. Or if you just want to publish your static website on that Nginx we already set up, then you're pretty much there. So this is what a server is. This, or rather everything that's going on behind this. It's really up to you what you do with it. And unless you shut it down and remove it from Linode, it should stay up, barring outages, and do what it does. It serves. It's a server. That's it for now. If you want more videos like this, let me know what you want to see them about in the comments. And if you want to know when new stuff comes out, sign up for my newsletter on my website. It's underjord.io, and the newsletter covers software development in general in a weekly newsletter. So take a look at that if you're curious, and stay curious out there. Thanks.